For various reasons, Halloween is a perfect time of year to tell ghost stories. And I ran a poll on Twitter, and a whopping 90% of the respondents wanted me to talk about my own weird experiences rather than explore a traditional ghost legend in this particular Halloween episode of Fabulous Folklore. And I have had plenty of weird experiences. Part of this is due to the fact that I used to work as part of a group that did paranormal investigations for entertainment purposes, but it also just comes from being curious, going to places that are supposedly haunted, and essentially going in search of ghosts and their various locations around wherever I happen to be visiting. So in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore, we're going to have a look at 4 of my rather peculiar experiences. Enjoy. Hello there, and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult, and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author, and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. I want to wish you a happy Halloween, although obviously that is actually on Monday, but never mind, I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, so happy Halloween. Now, for this particular episode, as I said in the introduction, I did ask on Twitter what people would rather hear. Would they rather hear some of my own strange experiences with ghosts, or would people rather hear about a traditional ghost tale of some description? And 90% of you wanted to hear weird experiences. Now, I can't tell you that there is a world beyond ours. I also can't tell you that there isn't one. So all I can do when I present these 4 experiences is to let you make up your own mind. Now, I am aware that there are other explanations for things that have happened. I am logical enough to understand that myself, and in some cases all I can go off is a feeling or a sensation or whatever that I actually had. So in that case you will have to accept that as essentially personal experience rather than anything else. One of them in particular does actually come with photographic evidence, which is on the blog post linked with this, but I'll let you know which one that is when we get to it. Now, this is only a small snapshot of some of the weird things that have happened to me in my time. I've had weird experiences sitting in one of my best friend's houses in North London. I was in John Knox's house in Edinburgh once, and I felt this distinct pressure on my shoulders, like someone was standing behind us pressing down on them. I just simply said, hey, I don't like people touching us. The pressure alleviated and there was an almighty bang on the wall right next to me. That was kind of odd. So these kind of things sort of just seem to happen in different places that I go to. So I've picked out the 4 which I think are kind of the most interesting. I haven't included the Ouija board one because I think I mentioned it in the Ouija board episode, so I've left that one out. And if you're not sure what that one is, then please just feel free to message me on Twitter and I'll tell you. But these are the 4 that we're going to go with in this one. Now, the first one is one that, again, I don't have any physical evidence for, which is a bit of a shame. But there we go. We will just have to chalk this one up to personal experience. Now, it happened on a visit to the Foundling Museum in London. And this was basically because of the fact I was about to leave London, having lived there for 7 years. And I started visiting all the places which I'd never gotten round to. And the Foundling Museum used to be the Foundling Hospital, and it was where mothers could petition to have their babies accepted. The babies would be given new names and then brought up at the hospital. They would get a rudimentary education and then sent off into the world when they came of age. Now, it is a really quite sad place to visit because while many of these foundlings did find a family of sorts, they never really experienced what we would recognise as the nuclear family. And I recognise that that also comes with its own set of associations for many people now as well, but that was essentially the situation that these foundlings had. But it is also especially sad to think of the mothers because they were pretty much entering a lottery because not all babies could be accepted. So the lucky mothers whose babies were accepted often left a token with their children to remind them of their families. Unfortunately, the tokens were never actually passed on, allegedly to assure a clean break for the children. So I was walking around the museum, looking at the exhibits, many of which were the tokens which hadn't been passed on, and sort of soaking up the quite melancholy atmosphere essentially. And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning on a weekday, so it was pretty quiet apart from a couple of women with their children. Now, the kids didn't really seem to appreciate where they were. And I then went up the stairs to the next floor, and the staircase is this quite large, sort of almost square staircase where you can sort of look on the balcony and then look down into the main central hall of the museum. And I was going up these stairs and I suddenly got this definite sense that there was someone on the landing above. Now, I couldn't see anyone, which I think probably would have been a little bit too terrifying if I could. But if I looked away, then I could almost picture like a matron-like figure standing glaring down into the front entrance hall. Now, I didn't hear anything, but I got the very definite sense that whoever this person was furious that people had willingly brought children into such a place. And there was almost this sense of someone saying, like, this is no place for children or entertainment, this is a place of business. Now, I didn't get any kind of sensation or whatever that the matron was particularly bothered by my presence, but obviously I was an adult, so why should she have been bothered? So I then just kind of continued up the stairs as if none of this was happening. And then when I got to the top floor where there was a Handel exhibition, as in the composer, then this feeling seemed to have dissipated, really. It was really, really weird. And I've never forgotten the feeling that a person was there, even though I couldn't actually see them. And it's one of those sensations where, you know, when you feel like someone's looking at you and you look up and find that someone's like staring at you, so you can just tell someone's looking at you even if you don't actually see it, kind of thing. It was that sort of sensation. Now, I know that it's true that it could have entirely been my own imagination running away with me, but all I can attest to is what I personally experienced. And it did actually go on to inspire a short story which you can read for free on my website, and I've put the link in the show notes below. So that was weird experience number one. The second one is kind of a nicer version of that one, and this one was from Belsay Hall in Northumberland. And I know I've mentioned Belsay Hall umpteen times before, particularly in the Silky episode. I love Belsay Hall. It's probably my favourite English heritage property in the country of all the ones that I visited, although Dover Castle does come a very close second. And what I love about Belsay Hall is the fact that you also have the castle and the grounds to visit as well. But anyway, this isn't an advert for Belsay Hall, although it kind of sounds like it. But anyway, they had this event on. I can't remember what it was for. But part of it involved a woman in 18th century dress explaining this, like, the story of tea in the British Isles. And she was sitting at this small table surrounded by props, like all the tea paraphernalia and all that kind of thing, in this glorious Grecian entrance hall. Fabulous location. And the tale was really interesting. It involved smuggling and tea bricks and all kinds of skullduggery and shenanigans. So put simply, it was fascinating. And it was really interesting because my mum and I were sitting among like a few visitors listening to her. And the woman was an incredibly engaging speaker, like really, really interesting. But I, again, suddenly got this weird sensation that we weren't alone. And this time the impression was someone standing on the banister above, kind of leaning over. But I got the feeling that they were leaning over to hear better, like they were interested as well. It was very odd. And again, it was that kind of thing where it's the same sensation you get when you just know someone's standing behind you and then you turn around and lo and behold, someone's there. It's a weird sensation. Obviously, I looked up, no one there. Nobody that I could see at any rate. But I did think that was really interesting that this woman was so good as a speaker that like other people were coming to listen to her as well. Now, I should point out, Belsay Hall is a fascinating place to visit if you are into the supernatural in any shape or form. And as I said, I've been hundreds of times, and there was a couple of times we went for events that they used to do, like for Halloween. So I saw one of the performances of M.R. James's Ghost Stories, for example, and they do them in the library, which is, as you can imagine, is quite atmospheric space anyway. And Don't Go Into the Cellar, who are phenomenal. So if you ever get the chance to go and see them, please do. But they were doing two of Dickens' ghost stories, one of which being The Signalman. And I was sort of sitting there and I was on the end of the row and someone or something just kept like tugging on the hem of my coat, and it got very irritating, particularly because there was no one nearby. So yeah, that was a bit of a weird experience as well. Gonna get into the third one, and this is the one where there is photographic evidence of it. And not all ghosts appear happy to listen, and in the third of my weird ghost stories I decided to go with the time one of them scratched me. And essentially I was in the house by myself this particular summer and I was watching a marathon of Lord of the Rings, as you do. I think I'd already had to have a break partway through the Two Towers because I was just getting really fed up with Frodo. But as I say, I was in the house, it was summer, it was hot, so I was wearing a sleeveless t-shirt. And I noticed this weird mess of scratches on my shoulder. And all I can say is they did not come from me, because when you look at the scratches, and there is a photo of them on my blog, my nails are wider than the scratches. So my nails are obviously like nail width. And I usually keep them quite rounded so I don't accidentally scratch myself. And these ones are quite thin, so they're almost like a little bit like the scratches you get off a cat. And they're also at some pretty weird angles that will be quite difficult for me to do, even if I was just kind of scratching absent-mindedly. And if you scratch, like, you know, because you've got an itch, you don't tend to scratch so hard that, like, welts come up. And that was essentially what happened. I've got no idea what made them or why, but they also just erupted in one go. 1 minute they weren't there, the next minute they were. There was also no pain that went with them, which was even weirder. So the area was really warm to the touch, but it didn't hurt, if that makes sense, which again you would expect to get if there was some kind of scratching going on. Now, I have seen physical marks before, because a few years prior to this, I'd done one of the ghost walks around Newcastle upon Tyne, because obviously that's the kind of thing I do for fun. And the tour guide had taken us round the side of St Nicholas's Cathedral, which you all know I love, and he'd made me stand in a corner beside the cathedral, sort of turned away from the rest of the group, looking towards the cathedral. And I think it was a story to do with witches and witchcraft or something. So it was, I was kind of playing like the ostracised witch character. I think that was what it was for. But it was really weird having the sensation where it felt like sort of time had almost slowed down, and I was convinced that if I turned round, I would be on my own, the group would have disappeared, but I'd also been the wrong Newcastle. Now, I've no idea where I got that sense from. I've never had it again since, but that was the impression that stuck in my mind. Now, luckily, when I turned round, I wasn't in the wrong Newcastle, and the group was still there, which was also helpful, because I think I would have really sort of panicked if they hadn't been. And what was really interesting, though, was the guy I was going out with at the time then started complaining of a pain in his stomach. And basically, when we got home, we checked, and he had these 2 massive red marks about the size of handprints on his stomach, and they were hot to the touch as well, but he didn't remember any kind of sensation of them being made. It was just 1 minute they weren't there, the next minute they were, and it was really, really weird that it coincided with me having this peculiar experience down the side of the cathedral. Now, I have heard various explanations for things like marks that appear out of nowhere, because it's one of the things that you hear quite a lot around the Mackenzie poltergeist in Edinburgh, and obviously I do have the separate episode on the Mackenzie poltergeist if you are interested in that. So there are tales around things like this happening and physical phenomena on a person. Now, when it happened to me and I suddenly noticed the scratches on my shoulder, obviously my response was basically like, hey, no touching, which is my general go-to, and it's never happened again, but it was just really, really bizarre. And as I say, there is a photo of the scratches, because clearly I was like, I'm going to need to photograph this is really weird. So you can make of that what you will. And the final story, this is about when ghosts really want you to know that they're there. And this comes from a trip to Colchester in 2011. Now, I originally started out doing my PhD in 2011. This was before I had a break in the middle at the University of Essex. So I needed to go to Colchester in order to be there to, get your uni card and all that kind of thing. Now, because I had to be there for 10 a.m. on a Thursday, it obviously meant that if I was going to try and head from Newcastle, I was going to need to set off at like 5 o'clock in the morning. That clearly wasn't happening. So I decided to just stay over in Colchester the night before. So did your usual thing, looked for places where I could stay, and I picked a room at a pub that was on the bus route between the train station and the university. And according to the website, it used to be an 18th century coaching inn. Now, when I got there, obviously checked in, and it turned out that my room was on the top floor. And if you've ever stayed in old buildings in the UK, you'll generally notice that the height of the ceilings gets lower, the doors get narrower, and the windows get smaller the higher up that you go. And this was exactly what had happened with this particular room that I had on the top floor in this inn. The ceilings were lower, as I say, the doors were a bit narrower, and it just felt a little bit more cosy, shall we say. So I was going to hazard a guess based on this that I was probably in what would have originally been maybe the servants' quarters or something like that. So I settled in for the night and I was watching TV, and I remember distinctly watching TV when I suddenly heard this weird noise outside my door. Now, it sounded as though someone was dragging something along floorboards, and the image I got in my head was like someone dragging, like, the old-fashioned trunks. So not like wheelie suitcases, which make like a very particular noise, but it was like something heavy being dragged along the corridor. And it sounded like someone was wearing boots that were kind of knocking against wood. And you know what like boots sound like on wooden floorboards? That's what it sounded like. And it was directly outside, and I thought, God, whoever this is sounds like they're having a really tough time with whatever they're doing. I'll go and see if they need a hand. So I went to the door, opened it, and the corridor was completely empty in both directions. So there was nobody dragging anything anywhere. And what made it even weirder was the fact that I looked at the floor and suddenly realised it was tiled with that weird fake marble that you get in a lot of B&Bs. So I think the tiles are probably, I don't think they're ceramic, but they're not wooden, basically. There was no wooden floorboard inside, so there was no way you would be able to get that boots on wood sound from this tiled floor. So I was a little bit sort of, ooh, what was that? But, I've had worse. This was after I'd done quite a lot of the paranormal investigation, so I just kind of was like, whatevs, I'll go back to bed. So got ready for bed, and we got into bed, sort of thinking, yeah, okay, cool, I've got to be up in the morning, make sure I've got my alarm set and everything. And there was suddenly a knock on the bedside table, and it was just a short, sharp rap, the sort of sound that you get when knuckles, collide with a wooden door. Now, furniture does make weird sounds when it's settling at night, so I just thought, whatever, and ignored it. That's a bit odd, but just thought I'll let it get on with itself. But then there was a knock from the bedside table on the other side of the bed, and then there was one from the desk several feet away, then the door of the bathroom, and then followed by the wardrobe door, and then back to the first bedside table. And I think the knocking made a complete circuit before I finally sat up in bed and turned the light on. And then the next knock came, but the room was still empty other than me, obviously, because I had to be there to know what was going on. And I basically did what any really tired northerner faced with the prospect of an early start the next day would do. I told it to go forth in slightly more colourful language, shall we say. Obviously, I'm not going to use the actual words because I know the kids listen to this. I basically told it to off that I had an early start and I didn't have any patience for any shenanigans, and the knocking stopped abruptly. I then turned the light back off, went to sleep and thought no more about it. And whenever I tell people the story, I've had people either accusing me of making it up. Why would I? If I was going to make it up, do you not think I would go with something a little bit more spectacular than spectral knocks on furniture? Come on. You would at least have faces at the window and all kinds of things. No. It was really boring. It was just knocking in a circuit around the furniture. It was really weird. I've had people saying that I've misunderstood the sounds, but it's quite difficult to misunderstand a knock. They're quite specific sounds. Some people think that I was dreaming it, but I know that I was awake. And I also don't remember my dreams either, so it would be really unusual if it was a dream, but I know I was awake because I hadn't actually gone to sleep yet. And I wasn't in that position of being awake and being asleep. I'd literally just turned the light off when it started. So it's a very weird experience. I've never stayed there again. I had a relatively peaceful night's sleep. I don't remember being woken up, but it was just having those two weird experiences kind of put together in the same place was a bit odd. So they are my 4 experiences. There are other ones I could have included, and I decided just as a little bonus at the end here to put this one in because I'm currently recording this downstairs in the dining room. It's 3 p.m. on the 27th of October, and the sun is shining in, and it's a totally normal day. But there are times when I'm recording when I'm upstairs in one of the bedrooms, and there's one of them in particular where I often get a really weird vibe from the corner of the room, and I don't know why. It's odd. I mean, it's also quite interesting because sometimes I'll be sitting downstairs, I'll be in the house by myself, and then I can hear someone moving around upstairs, but I know there's no one up there. Now, we have sometimes assumed that it might be if my next door neighbour's then moving around, is his movement on the floorboards kind of transmitting through on the floor joists and making ours move? Is it just floorboards settling? Again, don't know. But there was this one particular night I was recording and I just got this definite sense that I wasn't alone in the room, and I'm like, well, hey, I've got recording equipment. Why don't I try asking out to see if there's anyone there? And I did get a really, really peculiar noise, which I am going to edit in. So this is the noise that I got. And I have no idea what that was. So yeah, that was one of the things I got while I was actually recording. So all the times earlier in the year when you could just hear bird song and stuff in the background because I was recording next to an open window, that was quite nice compared with that noise. So yeah, I just thought I'd put that one in as a little bonus as well, because obviously, again, I don't know what that was. And there was just me in the room, and it was just me and my laptop, which isn't plugged in, because I find that if I plug it in, the microphone actually picks up on the hum of the electricity cord. It's weird. So it's not plugged in. There's no one upstairs apart from me, and then I got that noise. It's very, very strange. But anyway, what I would love for you to do is actually tell me any of your weird experiences. You're more than welcome to post comments if you're listening to this on YouTube. You can post it in the comments below. If you want to leave them on the blog post and then see the photograph of my shoulder with the scratches, like, don't expect anything like Hammer horror style levels of gore. It's quite sort of subtle. There's no blood or anything. It's just these weird white and red marks on my shoulder. But that is on the blog post, which is linked below. So you can always leave comments there, or you can tweet me, you can comment on Facebook, you can comment on Instagram, basically whatever you want. But I think it is quite interesting actually hearing people's experiences, because I think the more that we talk about them, the more that we realise just how odd reality actually is. So that is the end of the Halloween special edition episode. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy whatever you're doing on Halloween. If you haven't made plans yet, remember I am doing a talk with Cresswell Crags at 6 p.m. on the ways that people warded off witches. So we'll be talking like witch bottles, iron, plants and trees, things like that people use to try and kind of keep witches at bay and so on. We'll be talking about that. And I've also decided November's theme is going to be subterranean folklore. So expect folklore and legends associated with things like caves and underground passages and dungeons and all that kind of thing as well. So that's what we're going to have in November. Anyway, I hope that you have a marvellous Halloween, and I will see you next week for Fabulous Folklore in November. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.